In the scorching heat of an August morning in 216 BCE, the fate of the ancient world hung in the balance on a dusty plain in southeastern Italy. Here, near the forgotten village of Cannae, two colossal armies prepared to clash in what would become the most devastating single day of combat in Roman history. On one side stood the might of the Roman Republic, fielding the largest army they had ever assembled, over 80,000 men strong, their bronze armor glinting in the Mediterranean sun. On the other side waited Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general whose name had already become synonymous with terror across the Italian peninsula. What unfolded that day would not merely be a battle. It would be a masterclass in military genius that left Rome's legions shattered and bleeding, with casualties so staggering that historians still struggle to comprehend the scale of destruction. This is the story of Cannae, where tactical brilliance met Roman stubbornness, and where one man's strategic vision transformed a numerical disadvantage into the most perfect military annihilation ever recorded. The road to Cannae began not with the clash of swords, but with the grinding wheels of political ambition and strategic miscalculation. By the summer of 216 BCE, Hannibal had already been terrorizing Italy for 2 full years, his diverse army of Carthaginians, Spaniards, Gauls, and Numidians cutting a bloody swath through the heart of Roman territory. The memories of Trebia and Lake Trasimene still haunted Roman nightmares. At Trebia, in the freezing winter of 218, Hannibal had lured an entire Roman army into an ambush, slaughtering them in the icy waters of the river. At Lake Trasimene, he had orchestrated perhaps the largest ambush in military history, trapping and annihilating another consular army in the morning mist. In just 2 battles, this Carthaginian upstart had killed as many as 50,000 Roman soldiers, veterans, and fresh recruits alike, falling before his tactical genius. The Romans, however, were not a people easily cowed. Under the steady hand of Quintus Fabius Maximus, appointed dictator in Rome's hour of crisis, they had adopted a strategy of patience and harassment. Fabius refused to give Hannibal the pitched battle he craved, instead shadowing the Carthaginian army, cutting supply lines, and avoiding direct confrontation. This strategy of attrition earned Fabius the nickname Cunctator, the delayer, and while it saved Roman lives, it did nothing to satisfy Roman pride. For a people raised on tales of conquest and glory, watching their countryside burn while their armies retreated was intolerable. The Roman spirit demanded action, demanded vengeance, demanded blood. As the seasons turned and Hannibal continued his rampage through southern Italy, Roman patience finally snapped. The elections of 216 BCE brought forth 2 new consuls who embodied the competing philosophies tearing at the heart of Roman strategy. Lucius Aemilius Paullus, a patrician from an established military family, understood the wisdom of caution when facing Hannibal. He had studied the Carthaginians' methods, recognized the trap that lay in underestimating this foreign genius. But his co-consul, Gaius Terentius Varro, represented the voice of popular fury. A plebeian who had risen through political cunning rather than military brilliance, Varro promised the Roman people what they desperately wanted to hear. He would take the fight to Hannibal. He would crush this barbarian invader through sheer Roman might. He would restore Roman honor with Roman steel. The Senate, swayed by popular pressure and their own frustration with the Fabian strategy, made a decision that would haunt them for generations. They authorized the raising of 8 full legions, double the normal consular army, along with an equal number of allied troops. Never before had Rome fielded such a massive force. The army that marched north toward Hannibal numbered over 80,000 men, the largest military force the Republic had ever assembled. It was a statement written in bronze and iron, a declaration that Rome's patience was exhausted and her wrath was terrible to behold. But size alone does not win battles, and the Roman army that trudged through the Italian summer toward its appointment with destiny carried within it the seeds of its own destruction. Many of the legionaries were hastily recruited and poorly trained. The devastating losses at Trebia and Trasimene had forced Rome to lower its recruitment standards, drafting men who lacked the martial training that had made the legions legendary. Property requirements were abandoned in the desperate scramble for manpower, meaning many soldiers had never held a sword before donning their first mail shirt. These were not the seasoned veterans who had conquered Gaul and subdued the Mediterranean. These were farmers and shopkeepers, fathers and sons, thrust into the crucible of war with barely enough training to hold formation. Even more dangerous than inexperience was the divided command that plagued the Roman expedition. Following ancient tradition, the two consuls alternated daily command of the combined army, a system that worked adequately in smaller campaigns but proved catastrophic when facing an opponent of Hannibal's caliber. Paullus advocated caution, seeking to engage Hannibal only on favorable terms. Varro burned with impatience, eager to bring the Carthaginian to battle and claim the glory of victory. This fundamental disagreement created a paralysis of purpose that Hannibal would exploit with deadly precision. Meanwhile, the Carthaginian general was orchestrating a masterpiece of strategic manipulation. In the spring of 216, as the Romans debated and delayed, Hannibal struck at the heart of their logistics network. He seized the fortress of Cannae, a crucial supply depot that controlled the grain stores for much of southeastern Italy. The capture was not merely tactical but psychological. By taking Cannae, Hannibal demonstrated that he could strike anywhere, control any territory, and threaten Rome's ability to feed its people and allies. The message was clear. Rome could either come to him on ground of his choosing, or watch helplessly as their empire crumbled piece by piece. The location Hannibal chose for his trap was perfect in its simplicity. The plains around Cannae offered ample room for maneuver, crucial for an army whose strength lay in mobility and tactical flexibility. The Aufidus River provided a natural anchor for defensive positions, while limiting Roman options for deployment. Most cunningly, Hannibal positioned his forces so that when the Romans advanced, they would face south into the blazing August sun, with the hot libeccio wind blowing dust and sand directly into their eyes. Every environmental factor was calculated to give the Carthaginians an advantage, every detail planned with the precision of an artist creating his masterwork. As the Roman army approached Cannae in late July, they found themselves facing an enemy who seemed almost eager for battle. Hannibal's diverse coalition of warriors had been campaigning in Italy for 2 years now, far from their homelands, sustained only by victory and the promise of plunder. His army numbered perhaps 40 to 50,000 men, barely half the size of the Roman force. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in experience and unity of purpose. These were veterans of 100 skirmishes, hardened by years of constant warfare, bound together by their absolute faith in their commander's genius. The Carthaginian ranks bristled with the spoils of previous victories. Many wore Roman mail taken from the dead at Trasimene, carried Roman shields stripped from the battlefield at Trebia. Their weapons were a mixture of Carthaginian craftsmanship and captured Roman steel, but their confidence was purely their own. They had followed Hannibal across the Alps, through the snows of the Pyrenees, and across the breadth of Italy. They had seen him turn impossible situations into glorious victories, transform numerical disadvantage into tactical supremacy. When he told them that one more victory would bring them riches beyond imagination and a path home paved with Roman gold, they believed him without question. The stage was set for the greatest tactical demonstration in military history. Rome had brought overwhelming numbers, confident that sheer mass would crush their tormentor. Hannibal had prepared a lesson in the art of war that would echo through the ages, a demonstration that genius and experience could triumph over brute force and blind courage. As the two armies faced each other across the dusty plain of Cannae, neither side could know that they were about to participate in a battle that would redefine the very nature of warfare itself. The morning of the 2nd of August, 216 BCE, dawned with an oppressive heat that seemed to press down upon the armies like the weight of destiny itself. Across the plain of Cannae, 80,000 Roman soldiers stirred in their camps, the clatter of bronze and iron echoing through the ranks as they prepared for what many believed would be the decisive battle of the war. Standard-bearers unfurled the golden eagles of the legions, their proud symbols catching the early light, while centurions barked orders that had been heard on 100 battlefields across the Mediterranean. Yet beneath the familiar rituals of Roman military preparation lay an undercurrent of tension that even the most seasoned veterans could feel in their bones. The command structure that should have been Rome's strength had become its greatest weakness. On this fateful day, it was Consul Varro's turn to lead, and his aggressive nature burned like a fever through the ranks. He strode among the legions, his voice carrying promises of glory and vengeance, reminding his soldiers that they outnumbered the enemy nearly 2 to 1. The Carthaginians, he declared, were nothing more than a rabble of mercenaries, far from home, weakened by 2 years of campaigning. Today, Roman steel would end Hannibal's reign of terror once and for all. His co-consul Paullus watched this display with growing unease, recognizing the dangerous overconfidence that Hannibal had exploited so masterfully at Trebia and Trasimene. But the die was cast, and Roman tradition demanded that he support his colleague's decision, even as every instinct screamed warnings that went unheeded. The Roman deployment reflected Varro's philosophy of overwhelming force applied with brutal simplicity. The 8 legions were arranged in the traditional formation, but packed far more densely than usual. Where Roman doctrine called for flexible maniples that could adapt to changing battlefield conditions, Varro created a massive battering ram of human flesh and bronze. The hastily trained recruits were packed shoulder to shoulder with veterans, their inexperience masked by the sheer weight of numbers. On the flanks, Roman and allied cavalry took their positions, outnumbered by their Carthaginian counterparts, but confident in their ability to hold the line long enough for the infantry to break through Hannibal's center. The plan was Roman warfare at its most elemental: advance, engage, and crush the enemy through superior numbers and Roman discipline. Across the field, Hannibal surveyed the Roman preparations with the eye of a master craftsman examining raw materials. What the Romans saw as overwhelming strength, he recognized as fatal rigidity. Their dense formation would indeed pack tremendous punch in the initial assault, but it would also rob them of the flexibility that had made the legions legendary. Packed so tightly, the Romans would struggle to maneuver once battle was joined, unable to adapt to changing circumstances or exploit tactical opportunities. More crucially, their very numbers would become a liability once Hannibal's trap was sprung, as the press of bodies would prevent orderly withdrawal or tactical repositioning. The Carthaginian deployment was a work of art disguised as military necessity. At first glance, it appeared almost conventional. Infantry in the center, cavalry on the flanks, reserves positioned to reinforce where needed. But every element was precisely calculated to serve Hannibal's greater design. In the center, he placed his Gallic and Spanish warriors, fierce fighters but equipped with lighter armor and shorter weapons than their Roman counterparts. To the casual observer, this seemed like a natural choice, putting his most expendable troops where they would bear the brunt of the Roman assault. But Hannibal's genius lay in understanding that these warriors, while individually brave, could be trusted to execute a controlled fighting withdrawal that would draw the Romans ever deeper into his web. On the wings of his infantry line, carefully concealed behind the more lightly equipped center troops, Hannibal positioned his African veterans. These were the elite of his army, warriors who had fought beside him since the siege of Saguntum, equipped with the finest armor and weapons that Carthaginian gold could buy. Many wore captured Roman mail, their shields and helmets bearing the marks of previous victories. They would remain motionless as the battle developed, invisible to Roman eyes, waiting for the moment when Hannibal would unleash them like hunting wolves upon the flanks of the advancing legions. Their discipline was absolute, their trust in their commander complete. When the signal came, they would move with the precision of a machine designed for killing. But perhaps the most crucial element of Hannibal's formation was his cavalry. On his left flank, Hasdrubal commanded the heavy Carthaginian and Spanish horse, warriors mounted on powerful war horses and armed with long spears perfect for shock combat. These men had learned their trade in the brutal cavalry warfare of Iberia, where mounted combat was an art form practiced with deadly precision. On the right flank, the Numidian light cavalry waited with barely contained energy, their small, agile horses dancing beneath riders who had been born in the saddle. These were not men who fought for gold or glory, but for the pure joy of battle, their javelins and short swords extensions of their will. As the sun climbed higher and the heat became almost unbearable, both armies completed their preparations. The Romans performed their traditional sacrifices, examining the entrails of sacred animals for omens of victory. The augurs proclaimed favorable signs, though whether from genuine belief or political necessity, none could say. Prayers were offered to Mars, god of war, and to Jupiter, protector of Rome, while the soldiers checked their equipment one final time. Sword belts were tightened, shield grips adjusted, and armor straps secured. For many, it would be the last such ritual they would ever perform. In the Carthaginian ranks, a different kind of preparation took place. Hannibal moved among his men not as a distant commander but as a fellow warrior, speaking to his soldiers in their own languages, reminding them of shared victories and common purpose. To the Gauls, he spoke of Roman oppression and the freedom that victory would bring. To the Spaniards, he recalled the silver mines and fertile valleys they had left behind, promising that Roman wealth would compensate for their sacrifice. To the Africans, he spoke as a son of Carthage, invoking the shades of ancient heroes and the glory that awaited those who died in service to their homeland. His words were not speeches but conversations, personal connections that bound his diverse army together with bonds stronger than any chain of command. The psychological preparation was perhaps more important than the physical deployment. Hannibal understood that his numerical disadvantage meant that every one of his soldiers would need to fight with the strength of 2 Romans, but he also knew that his men possessed something the hastily assembled Roman army lacked: absolute confidence in victory. They had followed him across the Alps when experts said it was impossible. They had defeated Roman armies at Trebia and Trasimene when outnumbered and outmaneuvered. They had seen their commander turn desperate situations into glorious triumphs through sheer tactical genius. When he promised them that this day would crown all their previous victories, they believed him without question. The final element of Hannibal's preparation was perhaps the most subtle and most devastating. As the Roman army advanced across the plain, they found themselves marching directly into the teeth of the libeccio, the hot southern wind that swept across the battlefield carrying clouds of choking dust. What seemed like mere meteorological misfortune was actually the result of Hannibal's careful positioning. He had deliberately chosen ground that would force the Romans to advance with the wind in their faces, sand and grit stinging their eyes and coating their throats. Combined with the brutal August heat and the weight of their bronze armor, this environmental factor would sap Roman strength even before the first javelin was thrown. As the distance between the armies narrowed and the moment of contact approached, both sides could feel the electric tension that precedes great battles. The Romans advanced in their traditional formation, the steady tramp of hobnailed sandals beating out the rhythm of empire, their shields locked and spears leveled. Behind them stretched the greatest army Rome had ever fielded, a river of bronze and iron that seemed capable of sweeping away any opposition. Yet ahead of them waited not merely an enemy army, but a trap so perfectly conceived that it would transform Roman strength into Roman doom, numerical superiority into catastrophic vulnerability. As the morning sun reached its merciless peak, the 2 armies finally closed to within shouting distance, and the air itself seemed to crackle with the tension of impending violence. The Romans could see their enemies now, not as distant figures on the horizon, but as individual warriors whose faces bore the scars of countless battles. The Carthaginian line stretched before them in a formation that appeared almost conventional, yet something about it felt wrong to the experienced Roman officers. The enemy center bulged forward in a slight crescent, as if Hannibal were offering his weakest troops as bait. To Roman eyes, accustomed to the rigid perfection of legion formations, this irregular deployment looked like amateur hour, the mistake of a barbarian commander who lacked proper military training. Varro seized upon this apparent weakness with the enthusiasm of a man who had finally found vindication for his aggressive strategy. Here was proof that Hannibal, for all his reputation, was no match for Roman discipline and superior numbers. The Carthaginian center looked thin, almost fragile, manned by what appeared to be Gallic and Spanish troops in their characteristic chainmail and colorful shields. These were the same warriors who had broken at Caesar's approach in Gaul, the same tribal fighters who valued individual glory over tactical cohesion. Surely 8 Roman legions, packed dense as a forest of spears, could smash through such a formation like a hammer through parchment. But what Varro could not see, what his eagerness blinded him to, was the deadly precision behind Hannibal's seemingly casual deployment. The Carthaginian general had spent years studying Roman tactics, understanding not just their strengths but their fatal weaknesses. He knew that Roman commanders, trained from childhood to value aggression and direct assault, would see his forward curved center as an invitation to attack. He understood that the Roman military mind, shaped by generations of successful conquest, could not resist the opportunity to apply overwhelming force at what appeared to be the enemy's weakest point. As the armies drew closer, individual challenges began to ring out across the narrowing gap. Roman centurions, their transverse crests marking them as leaders, shouted insults in broken Gallic and Spanish, daring their counterparts to single combat. From the Carthaginian ranks came answering taunts in a dozen languages. The polyglot army of Hannibal united in their contempt for Roman arrogance. Numidian horsemen wheeled their mounts in elaborate displays of horsemanship, their javelins glinting like deadly flowers in the harsh sunlight. The sound was deafening. The clatter of armor, the neighing of horses, the rhythmic chanting of war songs, and underneath it all, the steady drum of thousands of feet marching across the dusty plain. The Roman advance began with all the majesty and terror that had conquered half the world. The legions moved forward in perfect unison, their shields locked in the testudo formation, bronze overlapping bronze until they resembled some great armored beast crawling across the battlefield. Above the shield wall, the points of their pila caught the sun like stars, while the golden eagles of the legions flew proudly in the morning breeze. It was a sight that had broken the will of countless enemies, from the painted warriors of Britain to the elephant armies of the East. The very earth seemed to tremble beneath the weight of Roman power, as if the gods themselves acknowledged the might of the approaching storm. Hannibal watched this display with the calculating eye of a master chess player, observing his opponent's opening move. Every step the Romans took was exactly as he had predicted, every tactical decision falling perfectly into the web he had spent months weaving. As the legions advanced, their dense formation forced them into an ever-narrowing front, compressed by the very numbers that Varro believed were his greatest asset. The Roman army, so magnificent in its disciplined advance, was unconsciously transforming itself into the perfect victim for the trap that awaited. The first contact came not with the crash of shield on shield, but with the whistle of javelins cutting through the superheated air. The Roman front ranks hurled their pila in the traditional opening of battle, the heavy spears arcing over the narrowing gap to crash into the Carthaginian line. The sound was like hail on a bronze roof, metal striking metal in a percussion that could be heard for miles. Some javelins found their mark, punching through mail and flesh, but many more clattered harmlessly against raised shields or buried themselves in the dusty ground. The Carthaginian response was immediate and devastating. From the center of their line, Gallic warriors hurled their own spears, while Spanish infantry launched a storm of falcata cuts that gleamed like silver lightning in the harsh sun. But it was from the flanks that the real answer came, as Numidian cavalry swept forward in a cloud of dust, their javelins seeking gaps in Roman armor with the precision of hunting hawks. The light horsemen danced just beyond the reach of Roman weapons, loosing their missiles and wheeling away before the legionaries could respond. As the missile exchange reached its crescendo, Varro gave the order that sealed his army's fate. The Roman trumpets sounded the advance, their brazen notes cutting through the din of battle like the voice of Mars himself. The legions surged forward with a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. 8 full legions of Roman infantry, charging across the remaining distance with their gladii drawn and murder in their hearts. It was the moment Hannibal had been waiting for, the instant when Roman aggression would transform from strength into fatal weakness. The collision, when it came, was like the meeting of 2 mountain ranges, a crash that sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. The Roman front rank slammed into the Carthaginian center with irresistible force, their shields smashing against Gallic mail while their short swords sought the gaps between armor plates. For a moment, it seemed as if Varro's confidence had been justified, as the Carthaginian line bent backward under the tremendous pressure of the Roman assault. Gallic warriors, their colorful shields splintering under Roman blades, began to give ground step by bloody step. But this retreat was not the collapse it appeared to be. Instead, it was the most crucial element of Hannibal's masterpiece, a fighting withdrawal so perfectly executed that it seemed almost choreographed. The Gallic and Spanish warriors fell back not in panic but in order, their line bending like a bow under tension but never breaking. They traded space for time, blood for position, drawing the eager Roman legions ever deeper into the carefully prepared killing ground. And so, the trap was complete. As the Roman center pushed deeper into what they believed was victory, Hannibal's African veterans closed like the jaws of death, crushing the legions from both flanks while his cavalry sealed their doom from behind. In a single afternoon, the greatest army Rome had ever fielded was obliterated, 70,000 souls feeding the dusty earth of Cannae. Yet from this darkest hour, Rome would rise again, learning that true strength lies not in numbers alone, but in the wisdom to adapt and endure. The echoes of that August day still whisper to us across the centuries, reminding us that brilliance can triumph over brute force, and that sometimes the greatest victories are born from the ashes of devastating defeat.